Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, a series of attacks occurred, killing at least 22 people and wounding dozens of others. A suicide bomber waged an attack near an army recruiting center at the Muthanya airport, killing 13 people waiting to join the Iraqi National Guard. Meanwhile, gunmen ambushed security patrol units in Baghdad, killing 8 policemen. Car bombs and explosions are still occurring in Iraq. This morning, Iraqis woke up to the sound of explosions coming from inside and outside of the capital. In western Baghdad, a suicide bomber waged an attack in front of an army recruiting center at the Muthanya airport, killing and wounding dozens of people who were there to join the National Guard.
The victims came here to earn a living, and then a lowly fellow, what can I tell you, detonated himself, killing all these people. What good will this do? At least 20 people were killed.
Simultaneously, unknown armed men ambushed an Iraqi convoy in Baghdad, killing and wounding about 10 policemen. According to sources at the Iraqi Ministry of Interior Affairs, the gunmen set a number of police vehicles on fire before fleeing. Targeting the police and Iraqi Guard is not limited to Baghdad, but extends to other cities. In the city of Bakuba, about 60 kilometers northeast of Baghdad, a car bomb detonated near a police patrol unit, but according to security sources, the attack did not cause harm to anyone.
A car rushed toward one of the patrol units and exploded. Nobody was hurt because the explosion was far away from them.
These violent attacks happened one day after a suicide attack in the northern city of Erbil, killing more than 50 people. Armed groups increased their operations following the announcement of the new government under the leadership of Ibrahim al-Jafari. At least 100 people were killed over the past 3 days. Most of the victims are from the Iraqi security forces. The world celebrated Press Day, which is increasingly becoming a dangerous profession. Journalists are being killed, kidnapped, detained, and tortured. The Reporters Without Borders organization said that journalists are subjected to oppressive measures, mostly in the Arab world, silencing and preventing them from pursuing and publishing the truth to their people and the world. Some countries have improved more than others, but all Arab governments are still opposed to freeing the press because they fear that their policies will be questioned. The International Press Association confirms that journalists have to work in hostile environments year after year. They say that the freedom of the press is going through difficult times, being attacked, ignored, and crushed everywhere in the world. Journalists and cameramen are killed, detained, assaulted, and harassed. In the West, just like in the East, journalists are forced to stay silent and to only say what the policymakers want them to say. This happens in particular during times of war and conflict, where civilians are victimized the most. Journalists are prevented from publishing truthful images of the civilian tragedies, except with the permission of military generals. A lot of examples can be found in the Israeli incursions into the West Bank. Israeli soldiers threatened, harassed, and even shot journalists to prevent them from covering what the occupation forces are committing against the Palestinians. Iraq is another place where freedom of the press is jeopardized. The U.S. occupation forces, the new Iraqi rulers, and the armed groups all disrespect, oppress, and take out their vengeance on the journalists. This makes the work of journalists in Iraq a very risky profession. The Reporters Without Borders organization released a report on Tuesday describing Iraq as the most dangerous country in the world for journalists, where 19 journalists died in 1 year, and more than 15 others have been taken hostage. And like in Iraq, journalists are killed and kidnapped in Afghanistan, the Philippines, Colombia, and Sri Lanka, with the aim of keeping them quiet. Here and there among these countries and others where there are civil wars, journalists have become the target of sniper fire, targeted just like military personnel and politicians. Revenge against journalists while working is not exclusive to hotspot areas. In other countries with a high level of political corruption and tyranny, journalists are punished with death, prison, fines, and kidnapping because of their opinions or their attempt to reveal the truth to the public. From Latin America to Africa to Asia and even Europe, governments, political parties, and gangs attack journalists, targeting them deliberately because they reveal corrupt activities and the people behind them. In covering up the truth, the Arab countries are where these practices are the most widespread. According to the Reporters Without Borders report, Arab governments are primarily responsible for these practices. They censor the press and suppress journalists if they are not able to tempt them with money to buy their conscience. All world governments do this without exception, using the pretext of serving the public interest, fighting terrorism, or defending the country's image. The tools they use are press laws and emergency laws that allow for arrests, imprisonment, torture, quick sentences, and closing down newspapers. Preventing people from acquiring information and heightening monitors of the internet are additional government measures taken by Arab governments to control the freedom of the press inside the country. The permanent slogan is, one opinion, not two, and consistent suspicion of journalists and the nature of their work. The biggest challenge to journalists is how to say no in a world where everyone says yes.
Palestinians have voted in municipal elections likely to strengthen Islamist factions against President Mahmoud Abbas, whose troubled Fatah movement. The ballot is also expected to reflect on the outcome of a planned parliamentary election in the Palestinian territories this summer. Samir Jamil has the story.
Palestinians turned out in large numbers to cast ballots in municipal elections seen as sort of a referendum on President Mahmoud Abbas's policies. Polling got off to a brisk start in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in an election that shaped up as a face-off between Abbas's troubled Fatah movement and Islamist factions. More than 2,500 candidates were vying for seats on 82 municipal councils across the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip in what could be a test of sentiment over the pace of political and security reforms pledged by Abbas. The vote will also shed light on prospects for Fatah and its main rival Hamas in a July parliamentary election that Abbas counts on to bluster his mandates for peace negotiations with Israel. Some 400,000 Palestinians were eligible to vote today. By mid-afternoon, turnout was 60% in Gaza and 45% in the West Bank, as flag-waving activists for various factions erected tents and greeted voters flocking to ballot stations. Hamas was running on the slogan, "Partners in blood, partners in decision-making." Some voters said they wanted more power sharing after decades of Fatah domination. Balloting proceeded against the backdrop of a fragile ceasefire with Israel, engineered by Abbas and seen as crucial by US-led mediators to launching the roadmap peace process towards Palestinian statehood in the West Bank and Gaza. But tensions flared anew yesterday when Israeli troops shot dead 2 teenage Palestinian protesters, and the Israeli government indefinitely suspended promised military pullbacks in the West Bank, citing Abbas' slowness to disarm militants. Abbas, who took office in January, has vowed reforms to root out corruption, replace unaccountable and incompetent officials, and establish law and order.
This is a historical day, a very significant day to the Palestinian people, because, as you know, they have chosen democracy to build their future institutions. And today we witness here in Bethlehem elections after an absence of 29 years since 1976. So the people, they are very anxious to practice their right to choose their nominees and to choose their representatives in the coming Bethlehem Council.
Analysts expected neck-and-neck races for the municipal councils as Fatah, dodged by perception of corruption, the Syria and remote leadership, sought to recover from a trouncing by Hamas in a January round of voting in Gaza. A recent poll showed backing for Fatah slipped to 36% in March from 40% late last year, extending a downward trend, while Hamas support rose to 25% from 18%. Palestinian legislative election is set for July 17th, but a senior Palestinian official said it could be put off because of disputes over amendments to the electoral law. Samir Jamil, Jordan Television.
Britons have started voting in elections likely to hand Prime Minister Tony Blair a third term, despite anger over Iraq and blasts at the British consulate in New York. Blair, far less popular than when he won landslide victories in 1997 and 2001, cast his ballot in the Northern English constituency of Sedgefield. The issue of Iraq has affected Blair's personal trust ratings, but the country's booming economic figures has balanced this out. His main opponents, the center-right conservatives, backed the war and have had trouble capitalizing on Iraq as an issue. The anti-war third party, the Liberal Democrats, are expected to gain at Blair's expense. In the latest polls, though, Labour led between 3 and 6 percentage points. But British Muslims angry at the Iraq war could threaten a safe Labour seat in East London. Election results are expected late tonight or early morning.
The war was a big issue. The fact that we can't trust the current Labour Party leadership is an issue. The fact that we need to have somebody representing us in the Parliament who will try to reflect at least our views, our concerns, is an issue.
Economy is the major issue for the people here. This borough is the most deprived borough in the country, and the National Health Service has just been really good, and the interest rate's been really good for us. The education's been fantastic. I'm a Muslim myself. Iraq is 4,000 miles away, and there's people dying everywhere. I really sympathize people dying anywhere, in England, anywhere, in Iraq, same thing. And I think just people, we got a lot of people coming in trying to capitalize on Iraq. It's just really, really unfortunate, taking on the poor people's advantage of poor people's incentive and getting them emotionally and dividing the community. It's really sad, and that we should stick to the national issue, the issue that's everyday's life, will affect everybody's life.
And as Britons voted, blasts at the British consulate in New York rattled nerves. Shortly after polls opened in Britain, 2 homemade grenades exploded in a concrete plant pot in front of the skyscraper housing the British mission in Manhattan. Windows were shattered, but no one was hurt in the blasts before dawn, caused by 2 primitive metal grenades packed with gunpowder. Authorities blocked off the area just a few blocks from the United Nations. No motive was known and no arrests have been made. New York has remained on high alert for months, and British security services have been warned of possible attacks timed to coincide with the elections. The explosions briefly upset British financial markets, and the governor of New York said there had been no warning call before the blast or any call since claiming responsibility. He warned against jumping to conclusions.
About 3:30 this morning, here on 3rd Avenue, a relatively unsophisticated explosive device detonated. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. What exactly happened is under investigation, but I think clearly this kind of thing is something that we are all concerned about.
Pakistani security forces have rounded up about 24 Al-Qaeda suspects. Their capture came a day after they arrested a man President George W. Bush called a top general of Osama bin Laden. Intelligence officials said Abu Faraj al-Libi, who U.S. counterterrorism agents say became Al-Qaeda's third most important figure 2 years ago, could provide clues to the whereabouts of bin Laden and his deputy Ayman al-Zawahiri. Pakistan says al-Libi was the ringleader of at least 2 assassination attempts against President Pervez Musharraf. Libi's capture was announced late yesterday, and he has been brought to Rawalpindi, the garrison town close to Islamabad, for questioning. A Pakistani intelligence official said raids were being carried out in several cities after his interrogation. U.S. security officials said they had supplied information that helped track Libi down, but the White House emphasized that Pakistan took the lead in the arrest.
There was a massive student protest in front of the American embassy in Okar. The surprise this time were the images mocking American democracy, using images of prisoners from Iraq and Afghanistan. Yet again, the students direct their activities toward the right path. This is the 9th demonstration in Okar, reflecting the atmosphere of protest that may not calm down until the American ambassador stops his tour in the country, aimed at intervening in Lebanese internal affairs and serving the interests of Israel.
We have one condition, one message and no other. America must not intervene in Lebanese affairs, because any intervention from them will not be balanced unless it serves the interest of Israel and the interest of the aggressive entity.
We are a democratic and free people. We have our own opinions and we have our sovereignty. We are capable of governing Lebanon.
Defending the resistance and its weapons, rejecting UN Resolution 1559, and the new American hegemonic project are the positions that were confirmed by the people in the demonstration.
We want the elections to take place at its scheduled date. We are with democracy. However, I want to say to those who want to know, whatever the results of the parliamentary elections are, they will not decide the fate of the resistance. For those who want to know, the parliament that signed the March 17th agreement with Israel is the same parliament that, during its time, gave birth to the resistance. That government betrayed its people and cooperated with the occupation army in the year 1983. It is the government that gave birth to the resistance.
However, the surprise in this demonstration was the mockery of American democracy, showing images of prisoners from Iraq and Afghanistan.
This is the showcase of American actions made in the USA. This is the latest product of the American civilization who uses the law of force. In the past, they had a hidden agenda, but now their goals are declared. Their violations are blatant.
Saeed Hariri met Maronite Patriarch Cardinal Nasrallah Boutros Kirkuk today. After the meeting, Saeed Hariri, son of slain former Premier Rafik Hariri, stressed the importance of safeguarding national unity and reiterated his support for the opposition. Hariri, who returned yesterday from a trip to the US and France, announced his backing for the Gaza in the upcoming legislative elections, but said he would accept the 2000 law because he stressed the importance was holding elections on time. The UN Security Council welcomed what it said was noticeable progress in Syria's withdrawal from Lebanon, but urged elections to be held on time, saying all United Nations demands had not yet been met in the country. The latest developments with Habib Battah.
The UN Security Council called for elections to take place on schedule this month in Lebanon and urged Beirut to seek international help to ensure free and credible polls. In a unanimous statement, the 15-nation council backed UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's insistence on starting the polling as planned on May 29th. The first votes in Syria claimed a full pullout of its troops last week. Annan has dispatched a UN team to verify the Syrian withdrawal, while a two-person team headed by the UN's top elections official, Karina Pirelli, is due to arrive in Lebanon this week. The Security Council welcomed Syria's claim to have withdrawn its troops after 29 years, a move it demanded in a resolution last year, and said Lebanon must now be free to decide its political future. Yesterday, the UN team verifying the Syrian troop withdrawal in Beirut said it was satisfied with their mission so far. The Council's Wednesday statement, read by Danish Ambassador Ellen Lodge, this month's president, acknowledged Syria's statements that its forces had withdrawn.
The Security Council welcomes also that the parties concerned have made significant and noticeable progress towards implementing some of the provisions contained in Resolution 1559 of 2004, while expressing concern at the determination of the Secretary-General that there has been no progress on the implementation of other provisions of the resolution, in particular the disarmament of Lebanese and non-Lebanese militia and the extension of the control of the government of Lebanon over all Lebanese territory, and that the requirements of the resolution have not yet been met.
The statement also urged Annan and the Lebanese government to agree on sending international observers for the general election, scheduled for 4 consecutive Sundays between May 29th and June 19th. It stressed that free and credible elections held without foreign interference or influence would be another central indication of the political independence and sovereignty of Lebanon. Deputy U.S. Ambassador Ann Patterson acknowledged that Syria's withdrawal was a positive step, but echoed calls that more should be done to implement 1559.
And I think it recognizes the partial implementation of 1559 with the partial withdrawal of the Syrians from Lebanon, but it also makes clear that a lot more needs to be done to implement 1559, particularly the Lebanese free and fair Lebanese elections and the disarming of the militia.
The Security Council also said the Lebanese people must be allowed to decide the future of their country, free of violence and intimidation, warning that any vote delay could worsen divisions in a nation still rebuilding from its 1975-1990 civil war. The election comes amid political upheaval following the Syrian withdrawal and February's assassination of former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, which many in Lebanon have blamed on Lebanese authorities and Syria.
Syria and Lebanon are to create a joint commission to examine bilateral accords. During a meeting between Prime Minister Najib Mikati and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, both leaders also agreed on opening an inquiry into alleged harassment of Syrian workers in Lebanon. In the same framework, they announced the opening of common offices of the Lebanese-Syrian border to control the flow of workers to and from each country. On the issue of the Lebanese detainees in Syria, Mikati said Beirut would hand all documents related to the issue to Damascus. More in this report. Newly appointed Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati said a joint Syrian-Lebanese commission would re-examine all accords signed between the two countries. Speaking after talks with Syrian Premier Najib Utri and President Bashar al-Assad, Mikati said the commission would ensure that all existing agreements between Syria and Lebanon fall in line with the interests of both countries and are implemented, quote, with respect to their sovereignty and independence. But it was not immediately clear if the Commission would amend the so-called Treaty of Friendship signed between Lebanon and Syria in 1991, at the height of Syrian dominance over the country. The treaty stipulates close cooperation between the two countries in terms of political, economic and security affairs. Mikati had told the Financial Times both countries have an interest in reviving the relationships, pointing out that Syria was a transit route for much of Lebanon's exports to the rest of the Arab world. But he said everyone wants balanced ties. The former minister became prime minister as part of a deal between the opposition and allies of Syria and Lebanon. He is a friend of Assad. Mikati told the Financial Times he would seek to use his friendship with Damascus to Lebanon's benefit. Mikati said he is, quote, not blindly pro-Syrian. In Syria, Mikati also said a separate commission would take a look at the issue of Lebanese citizens imprisoned by Damascus and held in Syria. Syria had released a number of Lebanese prisoners 4 years ago and said the controversial subject had been settled at the time. But many Lebanese organizations and family members maintain that hundreds of local citizens, including teenagers, have disappeared in Syria. Earlier this week, Syrian Premier Utri was quoted in Spanish daily El País as saying that any remaining prisoners in Syrian jails were considered considered, quote, terrorists. Without providing any numbers, he said that those detained were members of the Israeli-backed South Lebanon Army, which backed the Jewish state's occupation of South Lebanon for over 2 decades, which ended in May 2000. Otari went on to say that Syria had never initiated diplomatic ties with Lebanon because Beirut, quote, had refused them since independence.
Marzouk Boufass is a Moroccan-British citizen who, after living and working in the United Kingdom, became the only candidate for the Civilization Party in the British parliamentary elections. This is Marzouk Boufass, the first Moroccan candidate to run in the British legislative elections. He has been living in London for 35 years. He is a successful businessman who owns a chain of restaurants. He wants to transfer his success in the business world into political success. He says it is about time for the Arab and Moroccan communities in Britain to have one candidate to speak on their behalf in the House of Commons. The Arab community contributes to the well-being of the country's economy and pay their taxes, but they do not have a significant role in the British policy-making, both at the municipal and parliamentary levels. What is Boufass offering to those who will vote for him?
The Moroccans and Arabs in general have a problem finding sufficient housing and health care. Some suffer from dangerous diseases and do not get to see the doctor for 18 months. The taxes are very high and people have a limited income.
Boufass established the Civilization Party with a group of educated Arabs and ran for the elections in the area that is mainly inhabited by Arabs and Moroccans. He is trying to win the votes of 15,000 Moroccans who live in this district, which may have an influence on the results of the elections.
This is to benefit all of us, for us, our children, and the new generation, God willing. People find it strange because this is the first time a Moroccan has run in these elections. This is, of course, an honor for us, and we ask God to help him succeed.
Marzouk Boufass gives the Moroccan community of 40,000 hope to achieve their political goals in Britain. They have not been able to participate in the political process for many reasons.
I think that the main reason is because our income is very limited and we haven't achieved a lot at the educational and scientific levels. This explains why members of the community have not reached the level where they can run in the elections.
More than 40 parties are participating in the British legislative elections, including some parties who use humor, reflecting the British sense of humor. For example, one party uses the slogan, "Vote for the sake of the rainbow." Another party that defends the right of people to wear strange costumes uses the slogan, "Craziness is a form of art." Despite the fact that many parties are running in these elections, the Moroccan candidate Boufass believes that his success in winning these elections would be unprecedented. If he wins less than that, it would be considered the first step taken to pave the way for the Moroccan and Arab community to enter the British political process in a serious manner. Rashid Shafi'i Al-Alawi, Channel 2, London.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.